All right, guys, welcome back. We are going to go ahead and do the review for Django. So before I start recording, I did mention we are going to be working on the list project, right? So if you go to your, it should be Platoon. Give me a second. I was just there. Lord, curriculum. Yeah. So within the curriculum, it should be the exact same thing as what's in the assignments. You can find the folder for 8 review, and it does take you to the assignment repo. So this is what's here assigned on the curriculum for the review. If you start it, then you'll get to see how I do it. I purposely have not done this assignment, right? I have not done it. I do not know what to expect. I've seen some code from here and there from some people, but we will, do this down and dirty, see how it goes, the thought process, and I encourage you guys to, participate and ask your questions where you see fit. Before I do start, go ahead and drop in the chat what you think you would like to see and for me to focus on throughout the review. So if there's something specifically that you feel you want me to focus on as I go through it, let me know so I can keep that in mind. While those come in, I'm going to go ahead and talk through this assignment. So in this assignment, I have to create a user and add user permissions to an already existing API. You saw on my VS Code, I have nothing, no project, zilch, right? So nothing at all. I see here the schema of what my model should look like, and we will dissect this in a little bit. It's telling me that I have to create my app for a user, and then it's giving me the different endpoints and the type of request that I should be giving it. And then here it gives us the breakdown of what the endpoint should look like. If you've already started the assignment, you might have asked yourself the question already. And if you haven't started, you're probably asking now, why are all these endpoints nested? Is this wrong? Not necessarily, right? So you can do this, or you can do it in the manner that was taught throughout the curriculum, where every specific model has its individual endpoint, right? And the reason we taught it that like that in the curriculum is because that's what is more efficient for scalability, right? It is more commonly seen that way. You might encounter some places that have it like this, but it's not a good idea, right? In case you wanted to increase the size of your app and add more stuff to it, to nest every single resource within itself is not a practical way to build your application. So the way that was taught throughout the rest of the curriculum is absolutely correct. I'm not quite sure if this is done like this on purpose to show you guys that you can do it this way. But I'm going to go ahead and move forward. If you have any kind of suggestions, whether you are okay with me moving forward on making the assignment like this, or you want me to stick to the way that we were taught in the curriculum, let me know in the chat and I will do as such. Here is the picture for my schema. I see I have my user model, list, task, and subtask. And I can see the relations between all these models. And what kind of relations would you guys say if you saw this model? If this was presented to you by, whoever is in charge of your project, and they're like, hey, I need you to build me this application. Here is the schema of what it should look like. If you're looking at this, what kind of relations are you looking at? Yes, Jacob.
Is it many to one?
Yeah, it looks like it's a many to one, right? We have a many to one connection between list and user, a many to one connection between task and list, and a many to one connection between subtask and task. We can see here that the list has a field here called user, and that's what's connecting the list to our user here. It's a big int, so it's probably the ID of the user that's holding that that many to one connection. If I do this in my model, it'll probably be for key field. For the task, it's creating a field called parent list, which holds the ID for the list ID. That's another foreign key field. And then the subtask has the parent task ID field, and it's referencing the ID from task, right? Another foreign key field. right? I'm going to use this to actually build my model. So let's go ahead and come here. I am going to create a virtual environment. So I'm going to say Python-M for module, and then I'm going to call my virtual environment module. And I'm going to create a virtual environment within my virtual environment directories that I have established. I'm going to call this Django review. And that should be all I need. Now, let me just double check that it does exist. And I see here that I have my Django review virtual environment. So let's go ahead and activate that. I'm going to say envs Django review bin activate. We are now within the virtual environment. I can do pip freeze, see what's currently installed. There's nothing in here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start my project. So I would just make a directory here, and I'm going to call it review project. Let's go ahead and go in there. And now I want to start a Django project. So what should I probably install within my virtual environment first?
Django.
Yeah, so I should probably install Django. I'm doing this from the top of my head for the most part, but I believe it's pip install Django. And we see it was successfully installed. I have my Django application, and now I want to start my project. So what command do we do to start the project? We do not have a project, right? There's nothing in here. So I don't have access to my manage.py file. So what do I need, Jacob?
I think it's Django admin start project and the name of the project.
Yeah, I was pretty sure the same thing too. Django admin start project. I'm gonna call this to do app or to do project. And then I'm gonna put space and a dot to create that nested directory. And it's an invalid name. It doesn't like the dashes. It wants underscores because it's very picky. There we go. And we now have the project that's been created as well as my manage.py file. Let's go ahead and move our way in there. We're actually already in there. That's awesome. We have our project. And there's a couple things that we need to set up. Yes, James?
I was curious, do we need to start the project before we install like all the other like Django REST framework, PsychoPG, Django cores headers, or can we install that first and then start the project? In the cheat sheet, it makes it seem like we should do a lot of the installs first and then start the project. So I'm just curious if that matters.
Not necessarily. The installation is going to be added into your virtual environment. So whether you start it afterwards or you install the dependency before, it does not matter, right?
Okay.
When it does matter is after both of them are made, you need to connect it, right? So we have Django, we have our project, and now we need a way for our project to speak to our Postgres database. And there's a specific install for that. Do you guys remember what that is? It is pip install psycho pg binary, and if my memory serves me right, it has to be in quotation marks. Psycho pg. Did I type it wrong? I did. Psycho pg. There we go. There you go. Sorry, I can't spell. English is hard. So we now have Psycho PG, which if you guys remember from the first lesson, it is an adapter for Python to be able to talk to a database, right? So we install Psycho PG. And now we have that adapter, and we should probably create a database so we have something to store our data. So I'm going to go ahead and create a database, create DB. As a matter of fact, let me actually double check my databases. I don't know if I have a to-do database already. I do not. I do actually. It's probably from when I came through the class. So I'm going to go ahead and do drop DB to do DB. Oh, I'm inside PSQL, so I need to do drop database to do DB. And it's not like that because I have this. There we go. And let's go ahead and create the database. So create database to do DB. Awesome. And now we have our database. So we have a project, we have CyclePG, and we have our database. Well, now that we have those, we can go ahead and navigate to our project settings.py file because we need to do some kind of settings in here to ensure everything is talking amongst itself. The first thing I probably want to do is update my databases to track PostgreSQL. So I'll remove the default of SQLite. And then we are going to add the name of our database in here, which is to do DB. Let me go ahead and pull up real quick for my own sake. The installation portion of it, because there's a lot to install. I am not a robot, so I do apologize. But I have to make sure that I get everything in here. I try doing a lot of this from top of my head. Okay, we have everything so far. We have our database. All right. So up to this point, does it look like we are good? What do you think I might be forgetting? Is there any other settings I have to do?
Well, I assume you're going to make an app, like a to-do app, but you haven't made that yet, so it wouldn't
Yeah,
technically be included in the installed apps yet.
correct. So we're good so far. We have our project set up. We have CyclePG. We did some dependencies though, so we probably should. Let me go ahead and create a different terminal so I can interact with PSQL somewhere else and manage.py another. So I'm gonna do PSQL to do DB. But back to my original terminal, I have a bunch of dependencies. So I'm gonna go ahead and do pip freeze, and I'm going to save all these into a requirements.txt file to ensure if later on I want to, put this on a version control environment on GitHub, I should probably be able to also install these dependencies, or if anybody else wants to use this, right? Also, on top of that, in the event that I lose track of what version of my dependencies they are, this does it for me. So yeah, so we went ahead, we created a project, everything is installed, and now we can create applications. Well, we showed you guys how to do it from just regular applications, and we showed you user authentication at the very end. But if you recall, I did mention to you guys, it's probably a good idea to start with your user model before you do everything else, just so you can knock it out all the way. Don't have to worry about it, and you don't have any issue with your database with like creating fixtures and having to dump them. So the first app I'm going to create is going to be my user app. So I'm going to say Python manage.py start app, and I'm going to call it user app. I know the lesson wanted me to call it like a app user, but I'm just going to go ahead and call it user just for the sake of it. So we have the app The next thing is to ensure that we connect it to the rest of our project, so we can speak with it. So we're gonna say user app within our installed apps. All right, now let's look at our user. So there's a couple fields within our user app. We have ID, which is going to be automatically generated. We have email, age, display name, and address. We created our trainer without all the additional stuff, so you'll get to see that today. But you'll notice that we don't have to make all of them required. So let me go ahead and do something like this and this, just so we are on the same page. And then I need to import something specific for our user. Do you guys remember what I have to import to create a user class? Before, for regular models, we use models.model, but we have to use something very specific for a user model, right?
Is it abstract user?
Yeah, it's abstract user, and I believe it's from Django.contrib.auth import abstract. It is not. Let's go ahead and check that out real quick. Contrib.auth.models. I was close. I was close. .models import abstract user. Now, I am purposely showing this the way that I am for a specific reason, right? I understand that Django is very heavy. There's so many imports from so many different places. Like, unless you do this day in, day out all the time, you don't think that we all know every single import. I have my own cheat sheets. I have the curriculum that I can use, but it's always important to, if you have these cheat sheets, use the cheat sheet. If not, then resort to the documentation. So there's no shame to going through all your stuff and ensuring that you have the proper imports. There's so much for you to track that, you know, even a developer who's been doing this for years will probably forget a thing or two. All right, so we have our abstract user, and we are going to create our class of user, and we are going to inherit from abstract user. We want to have an email field that's going to be of type char, and it should probably be unique, right? Because we know that when a user signs up for our account, there should not be multiple of the same email, so we'll make this unique. And there's two fields that we need very specifically before we add the rest. I'm gonna go ahead and just do username field, and I'm going to assign that email field to take the spot of my username field, and then we have a different field where we will tell our user model what should be mandatory. As we mentioned before throughout the curriculum, required fields by default already includes a username and password that it will force you to use. So that is not required to be put into the required fields, right? The reason why I make my username equal to email is because by default, it doesn't take an email. It could be anything you want it to be. It could be, you know, Jacob, you know, the goat 12, whatever you want to call it, right? But that can be very abstract. We can get very different types of input. And it's better for the user who's using your application, just have something very simple that, you know, everyone will have regardless, which is an email. And it makes it better than for them to have to create unique, specific usernames for every application they make. So it's very common practice for applications to make emails as the username. All right. Besides the email, we see that we have age, display name, and address. So let's come down here. We're going to say age is equal to dot, and then I'm gonna make it a positive integer field. And we will say by default, it could be 18, right? But essentially, by having a positive integer field, it keeps people from putting a negative number, right? We could probably add a validator to also add like a maximum number and a minimum number. So we might want to import our validators. Does anyone know where our validator is being imported from? And of course, I wouldn't have it there. Validators is coming from Django.core. We say from Django.core, import validators. And we say as the, so we don't have to continuously repeat the name. We can say validators, and then we say v dot minimum. We'll say value, and we can set this to like 13 if it's a PG-13 website, and set a max value to, let's say 90 or 80, right? One of those. But that way we don't have some weird age like 150 or 200. They have to put in something that's very reasonable, right? We then have our display name. And this will be models.char field. We can have a max default or a max length set to, let's say 50. We can give it blank equals true in case they don't want to add a display name. And we can also make validators for it, but we are not going to make any validators because I don't see anyone that wants to focus on that. We have limited time and there's some more important ones we can focus on, but I see that we want to focus on models, CRUD, views, and serializers. If Juan, I see you put models. If you want to do validators, let me know. We can create some customized validators. But I don't want to waste 15 precious minutes that we can use on like CRUD. Right. So we have that. Next will be address models dot, and to keep it simple, we'll say char field with a max length of 100, blank equals true. And up here, we can also add blank equals false. So we have to get an email, which I believe it's still going to force you because it requires an email anyways, right? Could be assigned it to this. But just for redundancy, we can put blank equals false there. The rest is optional. We could probably do the same thing here and say blank equals true. We don't want to age. I'm gonna go ahead and do that just for the sole fact that whenever I'm like messing around with my endpoints and I'm creating users, I don't want to get, errors because it requires certain things or whatever. But I mean, there is a default here, so it's okay. But there you go. We have the email field, the age, display name, and address. And if you wanted this to be mandatory when you create a user, you would come to the required fields and you would add age, display name, and address, right? That's if you want it to make it mandatory. But in this situation, I don't care for it. I only really care for the email and password, but that's already enforced, so it's okay. Also, the application does not tell me anything about that field being mandatory. So I'm just gonna go ahead and leave it like that. And now we need to do a couple settings here, right? we have a user, but Django by default already has a user model that it uses. So we're gonna have to do some updates to our settings. And if I remember correctly, it uses REST framework. So we should probably import REST framework. So we will do pip install Django REST framework. Right? So we get REST framework in there. And just so I don't mess this up, let's ensure that those settings are set as they should be, right? There is REST framework here that we have to import off token. And since I already have REST framework in here, I might as well just add it in here. So we can say REST framework and then REST framework dot auth token, right? Because we're going to use token authentication. The next step is adding a REST framework field that's going to require this specific input here. You can add it wherever you want. I'll just add it below databases. It's a default authentication classes. And then it takes in a list. And we're going to say REST framework dot authentication dot token authentication. There we go. And last but not least is we have to tell it what model we want to use for a user. And it should look something fairly similar to this. Once again, it does not matter where you put it, you can do it right here as well. You won't have an issue. It's just that as long as it's within the settings.py. So we say auth user model is equal to trainer app.trainer. And that should be good to go. So I now have my user model. I see James. Yes, James?
Shouldn't that be user app dot user, not
You're
trainer
correct.
app?
Thank you. You are absolutely correct. Be user.
Too much of the Pokemon
user.
API.
I know, man. All you see is
Yeah,
Pokemon.
I was doing the same thing. That's why.
Thank you for catching that. All right, user app user. So you call the app name and then the model name with it being capitalized. Good catch. I would have gotten an error, and eventually I would have had to come back here anyways. But yeah, so we have the settings installed. We have our user. It has everything that it requires. Nothing crazy here. Now we can go ahead and make our migrations. So back to our terminal, we're gonna say Python manage.py, make migrations. And I'm getting an error here from REST framework. This is coming from probably my settings. I didn't put a comma somewhere. I knew it. Here he goes. There we go. All right, so no commas will mess you up. Make migrations again. And then let's migrate. And that was successful. Let's go ahead and double check with our database. We see all the migrations, everything that came default with Django. And we also see our user app user. Right. Let's query that real quick. I already forgot what it was. User app user groups. Let's just get user app user for now. So /d user app user. And it's good. We have the ID, password, login. All right, all the stuff that comes by default from the fact that we are inheriting from the abstract user. On top of the email, age, display name, and address. have any questions? Jesus?
Yeah, could I see the REST framework again in settings.py?
Yeah, it's right here.
Oh, no. Didn't you put it under like databases or something?
My apologies. Yeah, right here.
Yeah. REST framework.
All right, it wants it exactly like that. Yes, Jacob.
Yeah, I don't know if I missed it or not, but as far as like when you imported validators, where was that coming from again? As far as like, did you make a validators file or not? I don't
So
remember.
that's a good question, right? So validators by default is a part of Django, right? It has already pre-built validators.
Gotcha.
And that's what I'm importing. I'm
Okay,
importing
from
the
Django.
default validator come with it. There is
Okay.
validators that you could make, right? Where you would have to make a validators.py, make a default validator, and then import that in here, right? But I'm not going down that rabbit hole, so I can focus on the meat and potatoes of everything else, right?
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, validators don't change, guys, right? It's gonna be the same thing, right? You're gonna get a value with a regex, compare them against each other. You have the error message, and then you're checking if a good name or a good value, then return it. If not, then return the error, right? So that's the dirtiest version of a validator. So I don't want to go and waste time on that. The hardest part about a validator is probably coming up with the perfect regex for it, right? So yeah, so we have our model for our user. It's imported, it's good to go. And now let's go ahead and start making some endpoints for it so we can manipulate it, create some users, and see how that works. So first things first is going to our urls.py within our main project directory. Right? We have the default path for admin, but now we have a new user. And there's something that I want to import here, which is going to be the includes, or include for singular, right? And that's the method that's going to allow my path to route me to a different URL.py that will be located in my user app, right? That way I can separate where my URLs are located and I don't just jam all the URL paths within one file. So I'm going to create a new path. And this will be API/v1/users. We're going to take an include, and it's going to include the user app.urls. Now, whenever my server gets a request to this endpoint, it's going to use the include method to route it to the designated urls.py for user. That doesn't come by default in an application, so we're gonna have to go ahead and create a new file. I'm gonna call this urls.py. We have to import the URLs or the path module from URLs, and we probably have to import our views in here. We're gonna say from Django.urls imports path. Right. That way I can create my own URL patterns within this file. I'm gonna say URL patterns is equal to open and close brackets. Right. I am going to create the path for this. So one should be sign up. It should have a view called sign up and a name of sign up. We're not going to make tests, guys, but it's still good practice to add the name in there. So I'm just sticking to it from what we've learned. So I have sign up. I have login. It's going to use the login view that I'm going to create and give it the name of login. I see Juan, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, those don't need the forward slash at the end of them, like sign up /login/.
Yes. Thank you very much for calling me out on that. It does require a /. I appreciate it. So we have login, we have sign up. Next is going to be log out. is going to take in the log out view of name log out. Lord, I can't type today. Finally, we'll have a endpoint for info. And it'll have the info view with name info. We will have to import from our .views file within this application our sign up, login, log out, and info. And there's a typo here. All right, so we have those views being imported, but they don't exist, which is why they're white. So let's go ahead and come into our views. And there is a considerate amount of imports that we have to make for a view. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. All right, I apologize for that. So we have a considerate amount of imports for this. And I have the imports, so I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste them, and then we can talk through them so I don't waste time like printing or typing things out in front of the camera. So let's go ahead. Let me copy these imports. All right, and I have some errors, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Did you drop them in the chat?
Yeah, most definitely. Give me a second before I drop them in the chat. I have some issues here, and I'll speak about them in a second. So I have the default imports, but I have an issue here because I am not getting auth. And why am I not getting authenticate? Let me see. There is an issue with this. Where does import come from? Open new tab. So this authenticate method here is the method that we have to use to authenticate our user. But for some reason, I am getting an issue here. Let me just check where that came from to ensure we aren't ate up. If auth token, where do we get the authenticate method from? Oh, I'm dumb. My apologies. There we go. I added an additional item there within the import. So I'm going to go ahead and drop it in the chat. There you go. So the imports, right? So we are importing the validation error so we can check our serializers against our objects whenever we try to create something new. The authenticate is going to allow me to authenticate a user whenever I try to access some kind of info or log in. That'll grab the object or return none if it doesn't find it. The API view, so our API views can actually inherit from it, right? It would just be a regular class if we don't use the API view model that comes from REST framework. The response, so we can return the response after we get a request. We have some status here that we are going to use for all the views. whether it was a OK request, whether we create something new, whether we deleted something and we want to return a no content, or if for whatever reason the request was a bad request. I have two. I do not need one of these. Pretty sure I don't need this one. Oh. There we go. Okay. And then I have it's authenticated and token authentication, right? Token authentication, let's move this up first. It's going to grab the token from my authorization header whenever I make a request. And then it's authenticated, it's going to ensure that that user does have that token, right? That belongs to that user. Right. So these two go hand in hand. But all these are going to be required for my user API views. So maybe make a note of this, add them to a cheat sheet so you know what you have to use. So you're not scouring through the curriculum looking for them whenever you need them. Right. And because I am creating views for my user, I'm gonna have to do from user app dot models. As a matter of fact, I don't even need that. I can just say dot models because this is the directory win. Import user. Now, let's get into the actual user. Well, there's something that I have not done yet. And it's going to give me an issue if I try to start grabbing users or creating users. Who can guess what that is?
Do you have to migrate?
No. My serializers. My user doesn't have any kind of serializers to use my data. I don't have any models to grab anything like that. So let's go ahead and take a slight tactical pause here, and let's actually do that. Let's go ahead and create our other models and serializers that belong to this user. I may have jumped the gun and try to go straight to views, but we do have to have other models here that are going to share a relationship with my user. And then also, I need to have a way to serialize it being used, right? A very big important step. So before we even move forward and try to add anything crazier, let's do that. I do apologize if I jumped the gun. Down here, I'm going to create 3 new apps. One's going to be list, the other one's task, and then subtask. After I create those, I'm going to install them into my settings.py. And then finally, I'm going to create serializers for every single one of these so I can use it within my views. Right? So I'm going to say Python manage.py start app. And I'm going to get a list app. I'm going to get a task app. And a subtask app. Right? And here are my 3 new apps. Well, because they're new, they need to be configured into my settings. So we navigate to the settings.py. At the very top, I'm going to go ahead and install them like I did my user app. So we'll say list app, task app, and then subtask app. And there you have it. Now they are connected. We'll start from the list and work our way down. So within my list app, let's go to the models. And I'm going to go ahead and create a model for my list. So we'll say class list. It's going to inherit from models.model. And I misspelled this. Well, let's look at this. what does it take? It's going to need a list name, a user, and a completed field. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to say list name is equal to models.char field. And we'll keep it simple. I'm not going to elaborate on all the extra stuff like default list, blank was true and whatnot. But we would have a character field. There's no specific requirements within the curriculum. If you wanted to, you can come in here and add a default in here for a list name, which I don't recommend it because it's supposed to be a unique list. Make no equals true or blank equals false. Go ahead and add your max length into it. But for the sake of time, let's go ahead and leave that blank. The next one is going to be a completed field. And this seems to be a Boolean. All right, completed Boolean. So models.Boolean field. And this one, I'll just add a default of false. So it has something in there. Because I think it might give me an issue if it doesn't. And then the next field was our user, right? So this is a many-to-one relationship to my user. So what field is this? How would I type that out in my model?
Foreign key.
Foreign key. Correct. So in here, I'm going to say user. And I'm going to make it a models.foreign key, right? Which we know is a many-to-one relationship. The relationship or the model that my list should have a relationship with should be user, right? But I need to import it. So it tracks the model. So I'm going to say from user app dot models import user. And there you have it. We have to have a reason or something to do in the event that we delete a user and this list still exists. What are we going to do with it? Well, we need to do the on delete models.cascade. And what this is saying is in the event that this list loses the user that it belongs to, then the list should also not exist. And then finally, because it is a many-to-one relationship, we need to give it a related name. And the related name is going to be what our user is going to use to grab the list. And I'm going to say list. To elaborate a little bit more on related name, because I feel like this is a huge friction point, right? Why do we have related name? How is my user able to access my list? Well, I like to think of the related name almost like a ticket, right? Let's say I am the user and Jesus is a list, right? Jesus, when he is created, he needs to be assigned to somebody. Him as a list needs to be assigned to somebody. He gets assigned to me, right? Jesus has a field where he can write down who I am, so he knows who he shares this relationship with, right? So, all right, Jesus gets created. I write on his chest, you belong to this user, right? Or I give him stamp that says, hey, this is the user that you belong to. Well, how do I know what lists belong to me? Well, what the list will do, it creates a related name, which could be like a ticket or a sticky note. And on this related name, it says list. And he gives it to the user and he says, hey, user, my name. If you ever need me, call this name out and I'll continue. Right? And that's what the related name does. It gets attached to the user. You don't have to deliberately input it in here. All you need to know is that the user does have a connection with that list and he has a method of calling. That's what related name is. That is my little Batman signal to my list, like, hey, I need you, come here. Right? So whenever I want to grab the lists that belong to a user, I call that object user dot lists. And because we share that relationship with the connection of that related name, Django knows that that list is assigned to me. Make sense? Yes, James.
Since it's many to one relationship, if you make more than one list assigned to one user, how does it give it a different related name? Because wouldn't, or is that,
That's a great question. No. On a many to one and a many to many, that related name creates a field. The name of that field is the related name, but what's assigned to it is a query set, right? It's a list, right? That's why we use stuff like .all to grab everything within that list, right? How do we grab a specific list? That's when we use something like .get, where ID is equal to the ID of this list, right? So we will specify which list we want, right? On a one-to-one, it's not a query set. It's not a set of objects. It is one object. So therefore, you don't need to do all that mumbo jumbo. All you need to do is just call the name of the model, right? So if list was a one-to-one connection, user would say user.lists, right? The name of the model. But because it's many to one, we need that related name to connect it. And then we have to grab it a specific way because it is a list of objects, right? So we have to use .all, or to get a specific one, we can use .get, and then we give it the way of how we want to grab it, whether by its ID, by its name, or whatever. Right? There's also other methods to grab stuff from a query set, like .filter, which we didn't use often throughout the curriculum. But that's how you grab that many to one or that many to many relationship. Good?
well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. This list now has a many to one relationship with our user. All right. I think we are so we can move forward. We're gonna go into our list app. I'm sorry, not our list app, our task app. All right, so we're starting from the top up. It should go list, task, and then subtask. So let's go to models. And we're gonna do the exact same thing.
I have
Yes,
a
Owen.
question real quick before we move on. Why wouldn't you add a meta class into your list model?
What do you mean like a meta class? Are you talking about
Oh.
the
So like
serializers?
usually we include a class meta, or am I thinking of serializers?
You're thinking of serializers,
Okay, never mind then.
right? It's okay, no problem. Yeah, the meta class goes on serializers only. You can use a meta class here, but it will serve a different purpose. And I don't want to confuse you and start using meta classes in here, so I'm just keeping it out of the review. I'm just strictly sticking to what was taught and what's going to be tested.
Sick, thank you.
No problem. All right. Now let's go ahead and check out the task. We see here it has a task name, completed, a task description, and we see here a field called parent list. The connection of this is a many to one with the list. So we're gonna have another foreign key field that connects these two together. So we say class, and this will be task models.model. It's gonna have a task name of type char field. It's gonna have completed, which is going to be models.boolean field. We'll set this default to equal false. We'll add the task description next, and I'm going to keep the parent list at the very bottom, even though it doesn't have it that way, just so we can keep the relationships separated to not confuse you. To be task description, and this should probably be a text field, right? Because I don't know how big the description might be. And I'll just add a max length of 255, just so they don't get crazy. But yeah, there we go. None of these are required except probably the task name. We can say blank is equal to false, right? To make sure that they don't have the name of the task empty. That's probably something for sure that I probably want to make sure I get. And then the default, we don't have that blank because it already gives you a default. But task description, we can get away with not having a description for the task. Now, for the fourth field, which is the parent list, we say parent list. And before I move forward, I'm going to take a pause. And I'm going to give you guys the option to take a 10-minute break. Because I do not want to overwhelm you guys with all this. So we are currently working with the task model. We were in the process of doing the parent list. Are we currently looking at my VS Code? I didn't stop sharing the wrong thing. Yes? Okay, awesome. All right, so to connect my task to a list, I'm going to use what we already mentioned earlier was a foreign key. So models.foreign key. I want to get this relationship with the list model. So as you see here, I need to import it. So from list app.models, import list. And there it goes. It's recognizing it. I need to set up an on delete to handle in the event that I delete one of these, how to handle that in my database. And then my related name, like we talked about earlier, I want my list to be able to grab the tasks by calling list.tasks, right? So I will add tasks in here. So when a list object is trying to grab its tasks, it uses this name here to grab everything, right? So that takes care of my task. And then let's go ahead and close this bad boy up and move on to subtasks. Here is my models for my task. I'm gonna go ahead and do class subtask. It's going to inherit from models.model. I believe it should have a name. Let's look at it real quick. It is called subtask name. So subtask name is equal to models.char field. I'm going to make blank equals false. So that should at least have the name. It's going to have a completed field, which is going to be of type Boolean. I'll set the default is equal to false. We see that it has a parent task and a subtask description. Let's add the subtask description first. And this isn't mandatory, right? You can obviously add the relationship first, but I'm just trying to keep it separated for you guys, just so you know how everything's set up. We'll say models dot text field, and we'll have a max length of 255 characters. And finally, the relationship, which is going to be parent task, is equal to models.foreign key. It should be in a relationship with the task model. So we'll say from task app.models import task. Task. It requires an on delete method of cascade. And then finally a related name to be subtasks. Right? So now if a task wanted to grab its subtask, the task will call itself. So it will be like task or whatever the task is. Let's say there's a task to clean the car, right? The task is called clean car. If it wants to grab its parent its subtask, it will say clean car dot subtasks to grab all these subtasks that belong to that specific method. All right, and this handles my relationships. Let's go ahead and make the migrations. And I'm getting an error here because I have some imports in my views that do not exist. I should have seen that coming. Let me go ahead and go to my user app. And I'm going to create the class for all these views. It should be sign up API view pass class. Yes, Owen.
Yeah, just a quick about should we, I know you set up the user app with all the views and endpoints and whatnot. Would it be ideal just to do all of your models first? I know it's kind of subjective, but just to avoid those errors in your migrations, would it be ideal just to do all your models first? Is my question.
Absolutely, absolutely. I said it outside the recording to Jesus. I did jump the gun. I got really excited and started working on my views and endpoints before I had the rest of it made. Yes, right. We will essentially, we will want to do, here's the steps of how we want to do this, right? We want to create our project. We should be able to install dependencies, right? And then create DB, create requirements. And then the next step should probably be create user. Within here, you have to install dependencies. Adjust settings.py. Create the model. Make migrations. Migrate. Right? And then afterwards, create the rest of your models. Right? Adjust settings.py. Make migrations. Migrate. After you have all that set up, you should probably create your serializers. For your serializers, you would have to add the serializers for the many to many or many to one relationships. And what does that mean? Well, we've seen that whenever a model has a relationship with something else and we try to grab that information, we have to handle that many to many or that many to one relationship very uniquely, right? We either import the serializer that belongs to that other model it shares a relationship with, or we create our own serializer method field, right? So we would have to handle something that can go between here, between 2 and 3, or after 3, which we didn't talk about, is create validators. I didn't do that within our lesson because I didn't want to waste time on that one. But essentially, add validation to all important fields. This is like names, emails. That should be very specific, right? How you want your emails and whatnot. What else could probably use validation? That's very important. That might require a unique validator. I can't think of anything else from the top of my head.
Date of birth.
Date of birth. Yeah. A unique one, maybe.
Or unique format wise.
Yeah, date of birth. Yeah, sure, we can say that. Date of birth, right? So all the fields that require very specific input, like names, If you want them to be like in a title format, if you want to take into account middle initials and spaces between first and last name, right? Because let's say you only have one field that's just called name, and you don't separate it within like name, first name, middle initial field, then you will probably have to add some validation for that. For emails, you want to make sure that you have a very unique validator for that email to catch the emails that you want. So very unique fields like this that require specific validation, that's where you want to create your validators. We skipped the step so we don't go down a rabbit hole, but this kind of the process that we should be taking: create your project, create your user. Both of these require extensive settings to be adjusted. We saw that at the beginning. You should then want to create your serializers. Once your serializers are created, create your endpoints, right? So within your endpoints, maybe figure out how you want to handle your requests, right? How many endpoints you want, what endpoint should be used for what, stuff like that. After your endpoints are created, create your views. And then your views will be your user views, other model views. This is kind of like the overall scope of what your installation process should look like, or your project buildup, right? We get a little bit more specific, but this is the order that you want to do. After we got to create user, I kind of jumped the gun and just went straight to endpoints. That was wrong of me, which is why I took a pause and I told you we were going to shift gears and come back over here. But we just finished creating the models. We are not doing validators, or at least, any unique ones. We're going to go into serialize next, right? I should have done this from the beginning so you guys can see how this works. But yeah, that's kind of where my mind's at right now of how I'm attacking this specific project, right? So we have that. Let me go ahead and create these so I don't have an issue, because I don't want to remove my paths that I already created and spent time on. We shouldn't have an issue anymore. Let's go ahead and make migrations. Log in. I call this login, not sign in. That's fine. There we go. Now we're cooking. So I made migrations. Let me go ahead and migrate. And I see here I migrated my 3 new models. So it's good to go, right? Coming back to this step, we did our project, we created our users, we created the rest of the models, and we just made migrations. We are skipping over validators. We can talk about these if we have time at the end, if you like. Now let's create some quick serializers, right? So I'm going to start from the bottom up, and I'll explain why I'm doing it that way. So let's go with subtasks first. So within subtask app, I'm going to do serializers.py. And in my serializers.py, there is something I have to import that's coming from REST framework. I'm going to say from REST framework dot serializer, import the model serializer. And I'm getting an error here. Is it serializers? Yep, serializers. There we go. And then I have to import the model that I want to use for the serializer. So I'm going to say from dot models, import subtask. Now I can create this serializer. I'm going to say class sub task serializer, and it's going to inherit from the model serializer that we imported. It's going to have a class meta. The model field it's going to reference is going to be the subtask model. And the fields that I want, it's going to be all of them. We're going to keep it simple for now. Right? And that takes care of my subtask serializer. I'm going to go ahead and copy this for time-wise. And let's go ahead and make a serializer for my task app. So within my task app, I do serializer.py. I'm gonna go ahead and import this, but I'm gonna make some changes. This should import the task model. This should be called task serializer and should use my task model. Now, why do the bottom up? Well, what should happen if I grab a task object, serialize it? What's assigned to that task?
The subtasks.
Subtasks, right? And this serializer needs to know what to do with the subtask that is going to be passed in within. So from the subtask app.serializers, I'm going to import the subtask serializer. And then I am going to add a field here to handle those subtasks. Let me see what I call them real quick in my models. It's tasks, right? So my task has a field called tasks that holds the query set of all the tasks that it shares the relationship with. So here I'm gonna say tasks is equal to the subtask serializer. And I have to add something within the serializer. Because it is a many-to-one relationship, that means there's many objects that it could hold a relationship with. So what do I have to add within the serializer?
Many equals true.
Many equals true, right? It needs to know how to handle if it has multiple objects within here that it needs to serialize, right? And there you have it. This task serializer is good. I'm going to go ahead and copy this so I can use it for my list app. Create a new file, serializers.py. I add it in here, and then let's go ahead and make some adjustments. This is from list. I'm going to want to import this serializer from the task app. So let's update this. So from task app.serializer, import the task serializer. This is my list serializer. This is going to serialize my list model. And then I have to know how to handle the tasks that are assigned to this list. And let's actually make sure I did this correct. I think these are supposed to be called differently. Task, the related name that subtask is adding to task is different. There we go. Subtask. I made a mistake within my task serializer. Right, my task model is grabbing its task using the subtask related name. So that's a mistake I made. So let me go ahead and come back here and change this to subtasks. There we go. That fits the name of that related name. My list app is taking in tasks, right? It's going to use a task serializer. And we also need many equals true because a list can have many tasks within it. Right. Does anybody have any questions about my serializers and what I had to edit and why?
Can you just go back to your subtask serializer again?
Yeah. Here's my subtask serializer. My subtask does not have a field where it has like a list of query sets, right? It's only going to belong to one task. And it doesn't have to serialize anything. But my task will have subtasks within it, right? Because subtask is the related name that we gave within the subtask app, right? Here we go. When we connect a subtask to a task, this subtask related name is being attached into my task model. So I need to handle that field. Right? And tasks are going to be assigned into lists So list needs to know how to handle the tasks that get assigned to it. Any questions? Awesome. So there we go. We now have the serializers, pretty straightforward. We'll adjust them as we go through the project. All right, but now I have a way to serialize these objects. The next step is creating my endpoints. Well, we're gonna take those slowly. We already started some endpoints. Let me go ahead and close some of these directories. We are working on the user app right now. We created the path for sign up, log in, log out, and info. Now let's look at the views. All right. For the sign up.
Hey, Roger, sorry, real quick. For the users, you don't need to make a serializer for that?
That is a good question, and we will see how they handle that right here in the view.
Okay.
Okay. If we need to, we can, but let's see if we can do it without it. But that is a good way of doing it. You could do a user serializer, absolutely. Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and do a sign up. The way that this is working, let me go ahead and open up Postman. Give it a second. It's a little shy. All right. Here is the URL point I have, API v1 users. And I am going to work on the sign up endpoint, right? The sign up endpoint needs to be what type of request? Do you guys remember?
Post?
It's gonna be a post, absolutely. All right, so this will be define post. It's gonna take itself and request. When we sign up, how do we pass in the information within the view? When our front end, our client, puts in this post request, what needs to come with this request?
The info through the body.
Correct. The info through the body, right? So we should have some kind of JSON object in here that has the fields that we need to create our user. Let's look at what that looks like. I don't recall exactly what was mandatory, so let's look. Blank true, blank true, blank true. That's telling me that these are not mandatory. And we know that a user by default requires you the email and the password. So I at least need to pass in an email and a password within here. Let's go ahead and do that now. Let me say email is going to be roger@yankee.org. And my password is going to be 123. Right. So returning back to my view, how do I grab the body from my request?
Body data equals request dot data dot copy.
Yeah, we can do body data. I'm just gonna say data. I think you guys understand now what this is. I use body data just so you guys can appreciate the data stuff. But we'll say data is equal to request.data. And because we don't want to manipulate it directly, we're going to say data.copy. Right? So we have that. We talked about how our user model needs a username field. It needs that username field. I think we know what we are trying to use in our client, but we will handle the username field in the back. So we will say data username is equal to data email. Right? The email that's coming through this request, we're gonna go ahead and save it in a key called username. So when we pass the information into our user object, it's looking for that username and it can use it to create our object. Afterwards, we are going to say user, or let's say new user is equal to, we call the user model dot objects dot creates user, and we're going to pass in the data that's coming from our user. This will either create a user or return none. So we say if new user, then I want to create a token. Right? We are using token authentication. So whenever we have a new user, we take it in their information and we return a token so they can use to authenticate themselves throughout the rest of our project. So token is going to be token dot objects dot create. And I have an issue here. I need to import token, which I do not have. So add this to your list of imports. If you created a cheat sheet, it should be from REST framework dot auth token dot models import token. And there you have it. We can now create a token. There's a couple things that a token takes. We see here user and created as well as key. The one that we have to give it specifically is going to be the user field. Right? It'll create these by default. It just needs to know who to assign this token to. Notice that the user field is a one-to-one field, right? So this is establishing that relationship. So we say user is equal to new user. Finally, we return a response. And this response will have trainer. And we pass it, oh my bad, I'm still using Pokemon logic. User. It should have user.email. Or actually new user, that's what we called it. New user.email. And then it should also return the token so our client can use it in the front. And we are only returning the key that's in that token. If new user is not created, then we have to return a different response. And this response will be invalid user credentials. And I think that should be good. Let's say status is equal to HTTP 400 bad request. Let's remove this object curly brackets. I might get an issue here, but we will tell the client, hey, this is an invalid user credential, and then we'll add a status of 400 bad request. And now let's try it out. I need to run server. So Python manage.py run server. And let's see if we get on the first try. We create a post request to the user sign up endpoint with some data in the body. We send it and I get invalid token. What are you talking about, Lewis? Oh, here we go. My bad. Authorization was clicked on for my last time I used this. Once again, we send it. Let's go. It works. We now have our user, guys. Do I have any questions on how to create a user? Yes, Owen.
And not the reply, Postman. Can you go over the that header packet or whatever it's called, that header key again, and when you need to apply it and when you don't? Like obviously for your post, you want the authorization key.
Yeah. So the first time that a user signs up, right? He's brand new. He obviously does not need a token in the request because he's brand new. He doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
he
that's
has
clear.
no token to give, right? When we log out, we need to pass in a token, right? That token
Where-
allows us. What's up?
Sorry. Does that token automatically populate in there, or do you have to pull that from the user not model, but like where do you pull that token from to include that in the header?
That's good. And it'll become more obvious as we. But when if a
Your
user,
mic's cutting out really bad, by the way.
I'm so sorry. It's connected. I don't know. Can you guys hear me better? Hello?
Yeah, it's better now.
I'm sorry. But
No, it's all good.
concept wise, if a user is logging out, that means he's logged in. He has a token already. And if he's logged in, that means we've already saved it in our database. So as he's logging out, what we need to do is grab that token from our database and use that to ensure he can log out, right? Because you need to be authenticated to log out, because how can you log out if you were never authenticated to begin with? Does that make
Correct.
sense?
Yeah, so how are we going to go over how to pull that token again?
Yes, we will. It's okay. Good questions, though. Good questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this token because I think I might need it later on. Let me open up my sticky notes and add a token in there. Okay. So we have the creation of a user. Next, let's go ahead and log out and see how that works. So I'm gonna come down here. I know I'm skipping login, and that's because we're technically already logged in because we signed up. So let's go ahead and log out. So this class needs to have a post request to log out. It'll take itself and request. And as I just mentioned to you, Owen, it needs to have a token to log out, right? Because concept wise, when he logged in, he got a token to begin with. So I need that token to know that this is the right user that's trying to log out and can remove his information, right? And we have a method of doing that. And that's by using the token authentication and its authenticated imports that we have here. So if you recall, we had a field here that we set up called authentication classes, and we assigned it this method called token authentication. And what this does, it checks the request to see if there is an authorization header, and if it is, to grab the token from there. The next one, permission classes, takes is authenticated, the other one that we imported, and this is what gives you permission to move forward with the rest of the request or not, right? So it gets to line 31 on the request and it sees, hey, do you have an authorization header? Okay, you do. Now, is there a token here? All right, I see there is a token. Let me grab it. Permission classes says, hey, did you grab a token? Oh, you did? Okay, that means that I can move forward and I'll allow this user to continue with the post request. Make sense? Now, you ask, how do we get that token? This grabbed it. This grabs a token and is able to use it, right? To authenticate. But now, if we want to grab that token and delete it, we have to do something special. We have to say request.user. Right? When this runs, it authenticates the user by grabbing that token. So our Django knows, hey, he is authenticated, this user exists, he's good to go. And that allows us to grab the user from the request. Right? That allows us to grab the user from the request because this code right here on line 31 and 32 did that for me. Whenever it authenticated the user. Make sense? So now I can use the command request.user. And as we saw, when I create a token, one of the things it takes is a user object and it gets assigned into the user field, creating that one-to-one relationship. Well, how do I grab the token that's assigned to a user? By the related name. Right? So to grab the token that belongs to a user, I have to say user.authToken. So here I say request.user.authToken. And now I have his token in my hand. And I can say .delete and remove it from my database. Afterwards, I return a response of status HTTP 204 no content to let my client know that it was successful and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Make sense? You're asking, Roger, why don't you put a request if this fails? It won't fail. It won't move forward if it can't find a token, right? So it won't get here if he's not authenticated. If he's not authenticated, it won't even run the user.auth token. He will have a token if he gets authenticated. Make sense? It won't even get up to this point if he does not have a token. So I don't have to add logic to say if there is no token, because there is. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have a token, because my authentication classes, information classes won't allow it. Make sense? All right. So let's go ahead and try that out. So my user is currently logged in, right? I want to log out. So I copy this token. I go to the log out endpoint. In that body, the token is sent. I'm sorry, not the body, the header. In that header, the token is sent. And when I send it, I see 204 no content. Therefore, I successfully logged out. Any more questions before I move forward?
Is there a way to get that authorization key on Postman to show up? I don't have it on mine.
You have to type it in manually, right? So you click on the box to make sure it's tracking it, and then you type in authorization, and it should kind of auto-populate for you because it's tracking that it's one of the most commonly used headers.
I got it. Sorry. Thank you.
No problem. I know Postman is new. But yeah, good questions. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. So we were able to log out, sign up. Let's go ahead and log back in. So I'm going to have to use this for all my other views. So what we're going to do is we're going to add it to a class of itself that we can inherit from, so we don't have to repeat these lines of code. And we saw this during the authorization class, where I created a class called token rec or requirement that inherits from API view. And all I did was copy and paste these lines of code in here. And now I can inherit from that class. Token requirement. So when I go to create my views for all the other stuff, I can just go ahead and import token requirement, and I don't have to keep writing these 2 lines of code for everything that I want to authenticate with. All right. Next, we're gonna go ahead and log in. For login, I need to be able to receive the email, the password from the user. Just like on the client, you put in your email and password. Our backend needs to get these 2 fields, so it looks in our database and finds the user within it that matches the email and password that are being passed within the request. So I'm going to have to create variables called email, where I do request.data.get, and I'm looking for an email. And I apologize, I jumped the gun. I did not create the method. This should be a post method that takes in self and the request. And we see here, we're grabbing the request, we're grabbing the data from the request and looking for the email field and assigning it to an email variable. We also want to do that for password, where we say request.data.get, and I want the password. Now I got to grab that user. So I'm going to create a variable here called user, where I'm going to assign it the user object within my database. So I say that I want to authenticate it. Well, we have a method that we can use for that. All right, we import it and it comes from the default authentication model from Django. And what this does, it takes in an email and password. It scours through my database. It looks for an object that matches these credentials. And then it returns to me the object, or it returns none if it doesn't find it. So within here, as I mentioned, it takes in a username. We'll pass in email for the username. And it takes in a password, which we will pass in the password that we grabbed from the data. This method runs. It looks in my database. It tries to find my user. And if it succeeds, that user object will now be assigned into my user variable. Right? After I have that object, I need to create a token from him. Right? He exists. I know who he is. He does have access to my application, but now for him to continue doing whatever he wants to do on my website, I need to give him a token that he can use so he can authenticate himself when trying to grab a list, grab a task, or a subtask. So I say if user, and I say that because, as I mentioned to you, authenticate will return either an object or none, depending if it finds it in my database. So I check if it exists, right? If user. And if it is a user, I want to create a token by doing token dot objects dot get or create. This method from the token model takes in a object and the user variable. So we pass in the user object that we grabbed here earlier, pass it into the user variable, and then it uses that object to create a token for him and assigns that one-to-one relationship. This is not going to be readable, but yeah. Now, once that token gets created, I need to return that token back to my client so my client can use it for further operations. If in the event that that user does not exist, I have to return a different response where it says no user matching credentials. And like just like before, it needs a status of HTTP And here, instead of 400 bad requests, let's do 404 not found. So let me go ahead and import that. Four not found. All right. Let's test it out. Back to my Postman. I'm trying to log in. My client grabbed the information that belongs to his user, right? My email and password. I send this, and I existed within the database. It found me. I got authenticated, and it created a token for me. And it returned a status of 200 OK. Do I have any questions before I move on to info? You may have already noticed that the user that we are creating now is practically the exact same as how we created the Pokemon trainer. The user, once you create it once, everything else pretty much stays very similar. So I do recommend use that to your advantage. All right. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and try to grab the info. Let's go ahead and say, go down to info. Info needs to be authenticated, right? A user should be authenticated if he tries to access anything within our project. So we saw here that I created a specific class to handle that authentication within token rec. So let's just go ahead and inherit from that so we don't have to write the code again. I'm going to create a GET request to grab the info that belongs to the user. And it's as simple as saying return response. And then we return, what fields do we have for this? Email, age, display name. Okay, let's go with email and age since those are defaults. Return email. We grab the user and we grab his email. And then let's say age. And this is request.user.age. Now let's check it out. I'm already logged in, so I can just go ahead and grab this token here. I'm going to add it to my authorization header. I don't need this because I'm technically already logged in. And let's say info. Also, the request is a GET request. We send that, and I get back my email and password, my email and age as described. Do I have any questions on how that worked?
Can you go back to your views?
Time is 3:30, guys. We're gonna take a quick 5-minute break this time, just because I still have the other views for list, task, and subtask to cover, and I want to make sure that you guys see how that works. So this will be a 5-minute break. Let me go ahead and stop the recording. So we're gonna go ahead and elaborate a little bit more on info, right? We have request.user.age, but it would be pretty cool if we were able to change other stuff in here. Right now, we only have a GET method. So let's do a method for our info. So we're going to define a put method, right? It's going to take in self, and just like everything else, it'll take in a request. We need to grab the data. So we'll say data or request.data.copy, right? Now, what if we wanted to change the password? Well, if we wanted to change the password, we will have to do something like this. Or even if it's display name, right? Let's say we wanted to do something like the current password is equal to data.get password, right? And essentially what would have to happen is when changing a password on the info, we will probably need something like this, where we have a password field, where you have like the original password, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we might want to do something where we also have like new password. And this should be like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Right. So if you want to change something like the password, we'll probably have to take some stuff within the request body. We might want to check the current password and then change that password to something else. So we could do current password is equal to, and then we would pass in that password field within the body of our request. And then we could say if current password and data.get new password, then I want to move forward with this, right? Essentially what it's doing, right? If someone wanted to put in a put request at the info, the body will look something like this, where it's, you know, password, right? The current password that user has, new password, and it could be 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And usually if you think about how when you guys change your passwords for your like your social media, it'll tell you like what's your current password, and you add the current password, right? And then it asks you what's your new password, and then you add the new password. And that's pretty much what I'm replicating here, where I would grab that info from the request. I would try to grab the current password, and then I check if there is something in that current password. And if there is something, then we can check if there is a new password in there that we can use to update, right? And if so, then we should be able to do something like user is equal to authenticate, right? We want to grab the user of whose password we want to change. And we saw this in the login part, where to grab the user, we use the authenticate method that takes in a username and password. And we will probably have to pass in the email here too, right? So we'll probably want to grab the email up here, so we can say something like user is equal to request.user. That'll grab me the user after it's been authenticated, right? Remember, going back to that authentication classes that we added, when it does this, it grabs the user after it authenticates it. And the way to access it is by using request.user. So this returns to me the object of that user. And we can use that to kind of add it in here to authenticate him into our application by saying user.username, and then password is equal to user.password. That'll grab the username and password field that belongs to that object. It'll authenticate him to make sure that he does exist. It's a little redundant. Either or, he's getting authenticated here. And And this is just kind of to show you how we would do something like this in case you want to do this on your application to update user info. To update the password for a user is actually very specific, right? It requires a method that is unique to the user. Think back to when we updated a master user, we did is staff or is active, right? It has a method very similar to that, and that method is called set password, right? And this essentially takes the new password that you want to set it to. So we would have to grab that new password that's within the request body. And then afterwards, because we just changed an object, we have to run the full clean method and then save them into our database. And finally, we can return a response where we see like email is equal to the user dot email. We can say age is the user dot age. And let's also return the new password. We say new password is equal to user dot password. Right. And let's return a status as well. HTTP okay. And let's try it out. This could be the put method to update information, specifically password. Let's see how that would work. We see here that I'm looking for specific things, the field password, and I'm also looking for the field called new password. To authenticate my user, I need to grab the username and password as well, but that's being grabbed from the fact that it's been authenticated, so we don't have to add that into our body. So let's try it out. Let's do a get just to make sure that it's working. It's there. We keep the token in here because it needs to be authenticated whenever he's using the info view. But we are going to do a put request. Yep, I made it a put request. And then in the body, let's update this to a new password and see how that works. And it hates me. Let's look at what it told me. None type object has no attribute set password. So what this is telling me that it did not grab the user. And
If I remember correctly, you set the password to 123 when you made it.
one, two, three. Thank you very much. It still hates me, Juan. It's something is going wrong here where it's trying to set something to the user, but it doesn't know what password is on line 67 right here. It doesn't recognize this new password that we're grabbing. And I wonder why that is. If it's within here, new password, it's a none type.
Real quick, where is set password coming from?
This is a method that goes to the user. We can go to definition, right? This is the user model that we inherit from. It's a method that it gets, right? Set password is a method that comes from the abstract user model that we inherit for our user. And we see here that it takes in a raw password and it sets the password field into whatever the new password was. Make sense? So that's where that's coming from. But right now I'm getting an issue because it doesn't recognize that password. Let's do current password instead and see how that works. I think it's not liking how we're grabbing the password. There we go. Okay. Yeah, for some reason it wasn't grabbing the password when I did user.password right here. So I just went ahead and got the current password. And the reason it's probably doing that is because more than likely the password in my database is like hashed in the way that you see here, right? So notice that it returned to me the new password, but it didn't return to me 55678. It returned this. So it was probably not recognizing it. So whenever this request is made from the front end, that user needs to put in the actual raw password of what it is, right? So you can pass it in here. Because if you try to do user.password and grab the password from the database, it won't be in the raw format like 1, 2, 3. It's going to be hashed. So if you want to update something like password, that front end, that user needs to put in the raw password in there so we can use that instead. Make sense? All right. Let's go ahead and move forward. That's enough of that. Let's check out the rest of our models. So we serialize subtasks or lists. Let's actually make some endpoints for that. I'm gonna go ahead and close this up. We go to else for our project and create some new paths. We're gonna check the list first. So we'll say API v1 lists, and this is going to include list app dot URLs. Okay. And now within my list app, I'm going to add a URL file, urls.py. I'm going to import from Django.urls, import path. And I'm going to say URL pattern is equal to create a new path. And this first endpoint should return to me all my lists. So I'm going to say all lists dot as view, and then the name is going to be all lists. I'm going to have to import this view from my view file. So from dot views, import all lists. Okay, so that takes care of that URL pattern. Let's open up the views for the list app. And we're going to have to import a couple stuff. Let's go ahead and just copy the user app so we don't waste time doing all these imports. There we go. And then we're gonna need the model for list. So we'll say from dot models import list. We are also gonna have to serialize this list. So we should import the serializer we made. So from dot serializers import list serializer. All right, right on. Next, let's create our class. Who should have access to all the lists that a user has? Yeah, Owen?
Just that user that owns those lists.
Correct. So they probably have to be authenticated, right? And we created a class to authenticate already, and that's within my user app. So I can say from user app dot views import token rec, right? I created this, and essentially it has the authentication class and permissions class, and I'm going to use that and inherit from it. And this makes it so the all list view requires authentication to be used. Right? So we're going to create a get method to grab all the lists within this user. So it should be self and request. we're gonna do a try and accept block. Put pass here. And within this try block, I'm gonna try to grab all the users that belongs to the, I'm sorry, all the lists that belong to the user that's been authenticated. And essentially, let's actually grab the user first so we can see how this is working. Let's say user is equal to request.user. Roger, can you tell me again, how are we grabbing the user? Well, when the user gets authenticated, it allows to grab the user from the request. So the request now has access to that user. Right? So we have the user saved in that variable. Next, we can say all lists is equal to our list serializer. We're going to pass in the user object within it. So we'll say user, and then we want to grab all the lists that belong to this user. How do we grab a list that our user shares a relationship with? Correct. Using the related name. Right? So the user has a many-to-one relationship with lists. Let's look at the list model. In the list, we formed the relationship with our user, right? Here it is. It's saying, hey, my relationship is with user, and I'm giving him a related name called list. So I should be able to do user.list, and it should return to me the query set that belongs to that user. So we can say user dot list, and I'm gonna say, I believe it's all, and let's say many equals true. Right? So it's gonna grab a list of different list objects. We're telling it many equals true because there's a lot of them. And then finally, we want to return a response of the list.data and return a status of HTTP 200 OK. And in the event we get an error, I'll just say exception as E, and then return a response where I grab the error and I can return a status of HTTP 400 bad request. Let's check it out. The user is logged in. I have not logged out. So the token still exists. Let's check it out. Let's do info, get info. And you hate me, why? Could not send requests. Header, body. I think, am I not running my server? No module in grab. What are you talking about?
There's something wrong with your imports, maybe. But I see you imported the list model.
Let's try it again. I'm gonna stop my server and then rerun it. On server. And then let's put in that request. It's weird. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know, man. Django's weird. All right, well, I got my info. I don't know what it was saying. It doesn't know what it's talking about. I was right. We got the info. So I know I'm logged in. Well, let's try to grab the lists. And we have the header with the token of the user. So even though there's no like body with like the name or ID of a user, or is not in the URL, the authorization has the token that belongs to the user, and it's able to grab that, and it should give me all my lists. Fingers crossed. And then go 200. Okay, obviously I don't have any lists, so it's empty. We can create some right now, but it returned to me all the lists within here, but as you may know, there's no list. So it's working so far. Let's go ahead and create lists. So we'll add a post method to this all list view. So we'll say define post. It'll take in self and request. We are going to grab the data that's coming through our request by saying request.data.copy. And remember, what's being added to the request when you're trying to create something? What should that request have? It should have the body, right? The information. If I want to create something, I need some specific fields so I can add to my my model so it knows how to create that object. So I need that body. It's gonna grab it. And I need to do something with that body. Well, when I grab that body, I want to create a new list, right? And I'm going to use my serializer to do that. And I should be able to pass in the data within it. And what we are going to add is partial equals true. Because, actually, let's not do partial equals true. I'll show you why we need that. But we're going to pass in the data that's coming in. That data is going to look something similar to this. If I'm going to create a new list, I need a list name at a minimum. Oh, I didn't make it blank equals false. So I guess we can probably make one without it. The default for that list is going to be completed equals false. And then that list also needs a user, right? We need a user for that. So what's going to have to happen is I need to add a field where the user is in there, right? Because in my postman, what's going to happen is my body will look something like this, where I have like the list name. List name is equal to errands to run, right? That's the name of my list. We saw that completed is equal to false, so I don't need that. But it's also looking for a user. It needs a user to add that relationship to, right? So because of that, when I pass in my data in here, it's going to be looking for a user to assign it to it. Well, I can add in my body the user ID if I wanted to, but what's a different way of doing this? I already know that to run this post method, I have to get authenticated. And what happens when I run the authentication? I get access to that user by doing request.user, right? So I don't need to pass an ID to grab the object from my database. I don't need to pass in a name to grab the object from my database from my user. I already have that object thanks to the authentication. So all I really need to do is say data, create a new field called user. So my list serializer knows what it's grabbing, and then assign it the request.user. So that's my object. But because it's a many-to-one relationship, how do we add an object into a relationship? By the ID, right? Remember how we added moves onto a Pokemon? We call that Pokemon. We use the dot add method, and then we pass in the ID of that move. Same thing here, right? To add that user and that list connection, we'll pass in the ID. So we grab the ID from the user, assign it to this field within the data body, and that gets passed in here. Now, because it's going to be a new list object, we have to say if new list dot is valid, then I want to save my new list and return a response where I can see my new list dot data and get a status of HTTP 201 created. And if not, I should return a response where I get the errors from the validators with a response of HTTP 400 bad request. Now let's check it out. So I'm putting in a post request into list to create a new list. My user is being authenticated, and this is gonna be, I don't need anything else besides list name right now, so we'll leave it at that. This is gonna be the data that's coming within my body. Let's put this request in. And it tells me, hey, the task is required. Why? Well, because what does a model need to become instantiated? We said it needs these 3 fields. The user field, it's missing that. We need to add that into the body, right? The body doesn't have a field called tasks. And the only other field that we created was a user field, right? But there's another field that the list has, and that's the field that it shares a relationship with, which is tasks, right? Because when we connected, or when we created our task, we did this. We created a foreign key, and it's connected to list. And how is it connected by? This related name tasks, right? So although we don't see it within our list model, that list object does have a field that's called task that it needs something. So that's why it's telling us, hey, you require something in here. Well, to get around that, all we have to do is say partial equals true. And that lets you know, hey, I'm not bringing in any tasks right now. I don't have any objects to add into this list. There's no task created, right? So it's going to be blank. Expect that field. Let's go back in here and rerun it. And here we see that we created a new list called errands to run. The list has not been completed. It's assigned to user 1. And here's a tasks field that we talked about. Although it's not added in our list model, it still exists there because when we connected the model of into a list, we added that related name. So it has a task field, even though we don't visually see it. It expects it. I see everyone rubbing their eyes. I know you're probably, I'm so sorry that it's this late and we're still doing a lecture. At a minimum, you can review this tomorrow when you get some rest, right? So that's how we add a new list. Do I have any questions before I move forward? We got like 25 minutes to do the like a list, all tasks, subtasks. If you have no questions, I'll gladly keep pushing forward. All right. So we were able to create a list within the all list. Well, what if I want to grab an individual list? That's going to require its own endpoint, right? We're not going to handle that within the all list view. We're going to create another path. And this will be int of ID right? Where it could be like list ID. And this will be a single list dot as view. And then the name will be single list. All right, so we need to create a different view for individual lists. Right, and that endpoint is going to require the ID of that list. So in a different class, we're going to say class single list. Who should access this list? Only people that are authenticated. So we're going to add our authentication class. And then we are going to define the get method to grab a single list. So get self request list ID. Right? So if we want to grab a single list, how do you think we should do this?
Use the get 404 method.
Yeah, we could do
Maybe.
the get object or 404. Let's bring that in,
Yeah, that one.
right? And this will allow us to grab a list. Down here, we can say single list is equal to get object or 404. This requires I believe, what does it require? A class and how to grab it, right? So this should require something like list. And then it's trying to grab a list by the ID. So we say ID equals list ID. Right? So ID equal list ID. And then we should be able to do something like return response. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. We got the object, but what do we need to do to his object?
Serialize it.
Yeah, we probably have to serialize it. So serialize list is equal to list serializer. We pass in the single list. And we should be good. Let's see how this is working. It's being authenticated. We have the ID list that we want. We get the object or 404. Let's check it out. So we have one ID, which is 1. I want to do get. We don't need a body. We still have the header of authorization. We send this and I get an error. Single list.get got an unexpected keyword argument, which is ID. List ID. Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I did wrong. Where is my URLs? Right. The alias we gave in our URL pattern was ID, but we are calling list ID in the method. Right. This is looking. The argument you put here is going to look directly on your URL path, and if it doesn't match, you're going to get an error. So let's try it out. And here we go. We are grabbing the list ID. Right? Any questions here? We could probably add some, we'll probably change this, right? Because now we're working with users. We don't want to just go into all the lists. We should probably do something like request.user.lists. Why? Well, before we didn't have users that we had to dive into, but user has a query set of all the lists that it should have. So now, instead of trying to go into our database and look for it through the entire database of all our lists, we should only be within our user and see if he has that list or not. We run this again, and it works because it belongs to this specific user. If we had it how we had it before, it wouldn't be looking just in our user, it will look through everything within our list table. Make sense? All right. I'm gonna go ahead and move forward to stub lists so I don't waste any more time here. Right? So we have all lists, we got a single list. Let's do one for our tasks. Right? We're gonna go to our project URLs. Oh, wrong one. And we're gonna add a new point for our tasks. Include task app .urls. There we go. And now within the task app, I need a new URL file, urls.py. And from here, I'm going to say from Django.urls, import path, URL patterns is equal to path. I want this to return to me all the tasks that might belong to a list. So I'm going to say all tasks dot as view, and I'll give it a name of all tasks. From dot views import all tasks. Go ahead and close up all these extra files I don't need. All right, let's import the list imports that we have here, so we don't have to waste time on that. And then we're gonna change some stuff here. This should be task. This should be task serializer. And everything else should be good. So let's create that task. Class, all tasks. I believe that's how I called it. Yeah, all tasks. I'm going to inherit from token rec. And then let's do a get request where I grab all the tasks that belong to a user. Because this is inheriting from token rec, how do I grab that user? All tasks is gonna need authentication, right? After it gets authenticated, how do I grab that user? We've seen it already a couple times.
Get it from the user model bucket 404. So you declare whatever user equals get 404 or get object or 404 parentheses, and then you put in that variable of ID or user ID.
Good guess. I don't need to do that no more, right? The token requirement authenticates my user. And if you recall, after I get authenticated, my request can access that user. So I can say user is equal to request dot user, right? So I have that user. I want all his tasks. So I can say all tasks is equal to request. God, Jesus, what is wrong with me? Request dot user dot. And then how do I grab all the tasks that belong to his user?
Dot list dot task.
dot list dot task. Yeah, that's actually dot list dot task. This should work. Let's actually see if it does work. Let's serialize this. Let's call it serialized tasks is equal to task serializer. We'll pass in all tasks, and there's gonna be multiple of them, so I have to do many is equal to true. And then let's return a response of serialized task.data before we even move forward. Right? So my user is still logged in, so my token is good. I'm keeping the header in here, right? Because he needs to be authenticated to use this endpoint. We are working within our task endpoint, and we're doing a get method. I don't need anything from the body. Let's go ahead and press send. Cannot send requests, of course, because you hate me. No module name task app.urls. Where are you seeing this? Task app.urls. Where are you grabbing this, Willis? All task app.url. I think that's in my urls.py of my main project. Task app.urls. That's correct though. Let's go to my task app urls.py. What are you talking about? It's
In the list URLs, maybe?
the list URLs. No, it's not the list URLs. Maybe the task app URLs.
Is the dot list dot task the right related names?
It's not in regards to this, right? Because it never put in the request. We see that here. It would have printed out if it got to the view. It's stopping here. Argument include. Let's look at my project URLs. It's stopping here. Task app.urls, but why is it stopping here? Task app.urls. Does anybody see something I don't see, guys?
I said includes missing one argument at the same line you were just looking at right below it. Said
Yeah.
includes one required one or missing one argument.
Which I don't
Do you need
know
to do
what.
self?
No, I don't have to do self. It's just adding the name of the urls.py. Task app urls.py include. Did I do something wrong here? V1 tasks. Oh, this is infuriating. I'm wasting time. No module name task app.urls. Help me out here, guys. You guys see anything? Thank you, Juan, for attempting. But it's somewhere here in the urls.py. It does not like that. I'm gonna go ahead and remove this and just type it in again. Path API v1 tasks. It should include the task app.urls. And it's not liking that. What the heck is going on?
It's in the installed apps, isn't it?
Yeah, it is an installed app. We can check just to verify. Task app is here.
Okay.
It's tracking it. Here's my task app. My URL is pi. Everything seems okay. I have my endpoints. I'm just gonna go ahead, stop running the server. Now it's better. Okay, there we go. That, oh my God, that's so infuriating. What the heck happened, guys? But now it's working. Now we're getting a different issue here. It's how we're trying to grab tasks, right? It has no attribute named tasks. So let's go back to our view for task app. We're trying to use user.list.task.all. Let's see if that works. And does not like that. Well, our user, let's see how we grab that. Looking at our list model, this is the related name for list. Right, so we grab list, and then list has the related name of tasks, but it's not liking that. So we can say, oh, I know why. We should probably add a list that we want to grab the task from. Or we could say like all lists is equal to request.user.lists. Let's go ahead and comment this out real quick. Let's take it one line at a time. From list app.models, import list. From list app.serializers, import list serializer. Let's make sure this is working. There's an issue here when grabbing my list. Serialize list is equal to request dot, my bad, no, list serializer. All lists. And then let's comment this out and change this to serialized lists. No, okay, it's gonna want something a little bit more specific. So in this scenario, what will probably make sense is to specify the list that we want to grab it from. It probably doesn't know what list to grab and how to grab all those tasks because of our serializer. So the serializer field might not be named incorrectly. Field name tasks.
Do you need the partial equals true stuff anywhere in these?
I think we probably need many is equal to true. There we go. Many equals true, right? Because it's a query set. So it didn't know how to do that. So it's able to grab all the lists. There's one list in here. Notice that there's no task in there, so it's going to bring back 0. If we want to specify like all tasks, it would probably make sense to make an endpoint where it grabs all the tasks for a specific list. In that situation, what I would probably do is change this endpoint to have either an ID. So what I'll probably do is we might want to iterate through all the lists that we get back and then serialize the list within it individually. But there is no list in there with tasks, so it's going to give me some weird functionality where it's pretty much just empty. So let's maybe do something where we grab a single task from a list. We say single task. And actually, I take that back. Let's do all tasks, but we're going to do this as a list instead, right? And in the body, what we will do is give it a list ID, right? And here, this list ID will be 1. So within here, we want to grab all the tasks for a list. So we grab the user and we want to grab the list that it belongs. So we can say list is equal to request dot body or dot data dot get, where we grab list. What do we call it? List ID. Right. This will grab us the ID of the list we have. And now that we have that list, what I'm going to do is grab all the tasks that belong to that list. So I can say all list is equal to list.tasks. And it'll give me all the tasks within there. And I should probably add this within my task serializer. Passing many equals true. Right? So here we have our list object that we or the list ID. So we need to grab the list. So request dot user dot list, where we grab get ID equals list ID. Awesome. So we grab the list ID from the body, and then we grab all the tasks from there. Where we say, no, I guess we could do list is equal to request.user.get.list.get, where ID is equal to list ID. That gives us our list object. Right? And now we can say list.tasks. There we go. So we grab the list ID from the body. We grab our list object from the user by using get ID is equal to list ID. And now that we have that list object, we grab all its tasks, which are in a query set. We pass it to our task serializer. And now we should have all our tasks. So we can say all tasks dot data. Let's try that out. We have get the list ID. We can press send. And there's an issue here. User object has no attribute list. My bad. It should be lists. That's the related name. There we go. So we're able to grab all the tasks that belong to a specific list that the user has. Right? We have to take some little work around there. But from the top, the client puts in a request to our backend where I want to grab all the tasks that belong to a specific list. Right? Within the body, we have a field called list ID that gives us the ID we are looking for. We could also do this differently with the endpoints, but we're trying to grab all tasks, right? Not a single task. And this is all within the all task viewpoint. So because of that, we're going to add it within the body instead to get all tasks that belong to that list. Once we grab the list ID from that body, we use that ID to query the object of that list from user, right? Request.user.list. We grab the specific list object from that user. And then we pass in that list object with .tasks. This returns all the tasks that belong to that specific list. And because it's a many-to-one relationship, we have to add many equals true to our task serializer, which then returns to us all our tasks. And then we can do the return response with a status of HTTP 200 OK. And we could do like an if statement, right? Where we say, where do we grab? I guess we could probably do something here where you say if list ID, right? Because this will return either the list ID or none. If so, we move forward with this code where we grab the list ID to grab the list within there to grab the tasks. If not, we return a response of status HTTP probably not found if it does not exist. Do I have any questions about grabbing all tasks within your list?
Hey, Roger, I gotta actually head out, but this is gonna be uploaded to YouTube, right?
Correct. I'm going to upload it the moment we're done.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too, brother.
All right, take
All
it
right.
easy, everybody.
So time is 4:33. As you can see, there's a lot of content that I couldn't get through. There's just so much to cover when it comes to Django. Also, you guys are pretty freaking fried. I can see it in your faces. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now.